Hello and welcome to another episode of the Rowntree Gardens podcast. My name is Elias Rodriguez and I'll be your host. Today I have the pleasure of interviewing Marianne Tinch. I've had the pleasure of getting to know her more and more throughout the years, and she's been giving me some of her stories. She's told me a little bit about her ministry, and overall can describe events and experiences in her life with quite a bit of detail. So I hope that some of her stories inspire you and that you draw some of those interesting things that I've had the pleasure of experiencing. So without further ado, here is Marianne Tinch. All right. Thank you so much for joining me today, Marianne. Thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
We're on a podcast, so we're going to be doing a little interview to get to know you a bit. And I've had the pleasure of spending some time with you, and I find you incredibly interesting. So I hope that we can get a little bit of that today. So, Marianne, would you mind telling us a little bit about where you were born and where you grew up?
Well, I was born in New York City. My parents are immigrants from Germany after World War World War I was over. They couldn't get jobs, the young people in Germany, and so a lot of them started to immigrate, especially if there were multiple children in the family with sons.
Okay.
Then they would make choices who should come and who should stay. And in my case, they came separately. They did not know each other. My mother had a couple of sisters here already and a cousin. So she had, women had to have like backing and people that were willing to support them financially, return them home. So anyway, she was a nanny and took care of a wealthy family's babies, especially as they kept coming along. So that's what she did for about 5 years. And in the interim, she was a soprano and she loved to sing. So she joined up with a German singing group that went around to the men's coping house. That was a Catholic men's living place where when they immigrated, they collected them. They're trying to keep them off the street.
I see.
And make sure they had jobs.
Okay.
And they all had to have jobs to stay.
Okay.
And they met at a dinner dance at the coping house. My father asked my mom to dance, which she did.
And the rest is history.
Yeah, he fell in love with her and started wanting to date her. And about 5 years later, they decided to get married.
And how many brothers and sisters did you have?
Well, I have one sister.
Okay.
No brothers. And I met my husband then in high school, but by that time, my father was a bookbinder, which was a craft. And in New York, when Hitler came into power, basically, people didn't want to do business with the Germans if they knew they were German. And my father, his language indicated it and his name did too, so he was already marked. And he began to lose business and he couldn't make a living anymore. And he decided we had to move. And his older brother was here in this country also. And he was looking around also for what they called military-approved jobs. They were helping in the war effort.
Sure.
Especially if they were 4F or something and couldn't join and wanted to. That was my father's case. And but anyway, he ended up...
So where did you move to?
Pardon?
Where did you move to?
Where did he live?
No, you said you had to move from New York. Where did you move to as a result?
Well, what we lost was all of our livelihood and all of our friends and our family that were in New York.
Wow.
Us kids felt like... I can remember being very grieved over my aunts, uncles, and cousins and not being able to see them anymore. Because we got on my uncle's car, and my dad drove it from New York to Las Vegas.
Wow.
The goal was Los Angeles. But his brother got a hold of him and said, I found work in Las Vegas. It's really hot here, though, so you have to know. And they worked in a smelting manufacturing of airplanes place in Henderson. Very, very trying work. They came home drenched in perspiration and just exhausted.
My goodness. What a
By the
traumatic
end of the year,
experience.
my dad said, I can't do this another year. I'll kill myself. I've got to find something else. So he started looking, since he loved to paint and draw and all that, he started looking into just painting professionally, and the strip was starting out in Vegas. And so he went out and inquired. Well, he had to join the union. That was requirement number one. And you had to have money to do that. So he managed to collect the money together and join the union. And then they hired him. They liked his work. They saw his work before they hired him. And he was their specialty painter. He would paint murals on the wall.
Wow.
And all kinds of amazing things. And,
how wonderful. And
yeah.
Can we back up just a bit? You mentioned that you made the trip from New York to Las Vegas. How old were you at that time?
I was 7.
Wow.
My sister was 6.5.
Wow.
A very boring trip.
I can imagine. And then you had mentioned that you met your husband. Was this did you remain in?
Yeah. So after we settled in Las Vegas, they finally built the houses. People were living in tents and just spots in the desert with no covering. It was amazing. I mean, it was hard for me as a little one to even see that, because I'd see women all by themselves in the middle of the desert, plunked down somewhere with little kids running around. No running water, no power, no covering, nothing.
Wow.
And my heart went out to them. I thought, this isn't good. And we were living in a motel. We couldn't find a place to live either. And my uncle found that they were going to build some houses, so he was always kind of sharp and ahead of the season, and he went down and plunked a down payment to buy a house for himself, really for us. He basically had lived with my parents for a while anyway, and he liked the arrangement. My mother cooked for him, and she did his laundry, and he had a good deal.
It worked out. It sounds like a good deal.
Yeah, and so anyway, he went on then to Los Angeles anyway, because he knew he couldn't do that work another year either with the heat. And he ended up working, in the end, he ended up working for the Los Angeles County, and he bound all of their legal books that they stored, because they didn't have computers then. So everything, and he took us kids and my mom down and showed us where he worked. And he said, if Carl ever wants to work here, I put his name in, and I know he'd get a job, because he's trained just the way I was.
Sure.
And they love my work. And he said, but if he likes what he's doing, so he liked what he was doing at the time, so he stayed. We got in our little house, 2-bedroom, 1 bath, no air conditioning, just evaporative coolers.
Oh, my.
Very, very hot. But we adjusted, and we started, they had a new school. They had to build schools then for the kids. And I was in the one elementary school, and my husband was one housing track down from us in another elementary school. We didn't know each other then. We probably passed each other in the schools, but we really didn't know each other. He was 4 years ahead of me in school. So it wasn't until high school, and I had a girlfriend whose mom wanted to give her a surprise birthday party, and they had just moved into our area. So she did that, and she called me up because Janet considered me one of her friends. So she called me up, and she asked me if I'd come to the party. And I said, if my mom would say yes, then I can come. Otherwise, no. But I'll let you know as soon as I know. And so I was given permission to go, so I went, because it was going to be a boy-girl party. I'd never been to that. I was like just entering 8th grade. My mother was not from Europe's way of doing things. Girls only went out when they were escorted with another adult that was responsible. And but she let me go to that, and that was good. So we were sitting across the room from each other in chairs, their group and our group. Nobody knows anybody across the groups. So we're introducing each other, and I didn't even hear what was going on. I just started looking at the people thinking, this is so uncomfortable. I hadn't done anything like that before, and I just wasn't sure about all these boys. So it just kind of blew my head. And I'm sitting there, and I used to talk to the Lord a lot. I still do, and He gives me impressions sometimes. And this day He gave me an impression, and it never left me. I had it in my spirit, and it said, "That's your future husband."
Wow.
And I'm looking at Dick, and I'm backtracking on the row to have a look at him because I really hadn't paid much attention just down the aisle. And I'm laughing at God. I'm saying, "You're kidding me. I'm 14 years old and just starting out of elementary school. I'm not interested in a husband. I haven't even dated." That was my response. So, and I say, "Well, if this is really you, God, and true, you're going to have to work this out because I don't know anything about him. And he don't know anything about me." And I left it there. And the irony of it is school starts. I'm in a Latin class, and Dick comes in and sits down right behind me.
Wow.
In the same Latin class. So we took Latin that year together, and that was the end of his high school. He graduated. Now he's ready to be drafted. Korea was on, and they were drafting the boys. And I remember him telling we had group dated a few times. I did get to go on a few group dates with the church.
Gotcha.
So there was supervision. And so Dick was telling me, "I really don't want to go in the Army. And I'm not qualified for the Air Force. I've already checked. Maybe the Navy." So I said, "What's your plan?" He said, "I'm going to take the train to L.A., where they register young men in this area. In Nevada, they had to go to L.A. And I said, "Well," he says, "I have to see what's going to happen." So I see him off at the train the next morning. I did not tell my mother that ahead of time, but I did tell the authorities at the school, so they knew where I was, and I asked if it was okay if I went. So when roll call came, they weren't calling my mother. And then she's having a fit.
She would have caught on to your plan and your scheme.
She would have been flipping because I learned not to lie as a youngster. Telling the truth was very important, and you always get caught in your lies. That was the kicker. And so I covered my tracks. I guess the way we put it. And I covered my tracks. I told the principal of the school what I wanted to do. And of course, he's seeing all the boys that just graduated going off to war. So he was for it. He says, "Can you be okay if you walk down the train station?" And I said, "Yeah, I think it's only about 8 blocks. He said, "You're right. It's not very far. Just go straight down that street and you'll run right into the train station. Just wait on the, in the waiting area." And he says, "But then come right back." And I said, "I will come right back." And I did, and I checked in with him, so he knew I was back. So I was okay, but it was hard for me to see him go. By that time, we had developed a little bit of a relationship. We liked each other. That was important.
Yes. And now you're seeing him take off to L.A. and possibly Korea next.
He actually went with 2 other men. They 2 other guys he knew that were going to do the same thing, so they went down together. So he wasn't alone on the train.
Okay.
But nevertheless, it was hard to see them all go.
And what happened next?
Well, I went back to school, and pretty soon I hear from him, and he said they wouldn't let me in the Navy. They were already full for the month, had their quota.
Whoa.
So he said, they sent me over to the Marines. I don't know much about the Marines, but he said it's got to have been better than the Army. And I'm thinking, I don't know about that.
Wow.
But he joined the Marines, and they gave him a good deal. They said, instead of signing you up for 4 years, sign you up for 3. And we'll give you some tests, and if you do well on them, we'll give you training. We'll send you to school, literally like you're going to college. and we'll get you trained for whatever you're best qualified for in the Marines. And that will launch you possibly in a future career. And he had been working in the newspaper business. He was a printing pressman. So he helped run the big machines that printed the papers in those days. And he joined the Union, and he was passing the tests, and he planned to continue to get his degree for that so that he could work after we were out of the Marines. If we decided to get married, that he'd have a way to make a living. So we wanted a family, and we did not want me to work, and I did not want to work. I wanted to raise a family. If I had kids, I was staying home with them. I babysat too much to see what happens when you don't. And so that's
and you didn't want that to happen to your family.
Yeah, so you live as you're learning as you live. And some of the kids were in bad trouble, especially with dads. They needed their dads so bad, and it was just hard to see. And so I thought, if I have any kids, I really want to stay home, God. So that's a prayer I'm putting up there.
And did it work?
And it worked.
Okay.
I wanted to be a teacher, so I still had a strong desire to go to college.
Gotcha.
So my husband says to me, by now we've decided to marry. We married on October 23rd in 54. And my mother was just kept saying, oh, you're too young, you're too young. And I said, it's a done deal, Mom. I'm making my dress already, and we're going to get married. Please accept this and my future husband, because he's going to be your son-in-law, and you've never had a son. So I don't know if she liked that or not, but that's what I said. And
how old were you?
By then I was 18,
okay,
almost 19.
Okay.
I was 1 week away from being 19 when we married. Now here's another side trip, but it's short. In those days in Nevada, if you were a man, you had to be 21 to marry, unless you had your parents' plural approval. And I didn't know if I had my husband's mother's approval, because she was an anti-Catholic person. And I was warned of that. And I said, well, I'll just do what I do with everybody, and if she likes me, she likes me. If she doesn't, I can't make her. So we became friends. She liked me after a while.
All right.
She loved my kids, so that
helped.
That was an inroad.
You would use them as a little bit of
I knew I had an inroad.
There you go.
Anyhow.
And so if it's okay, we're going to fast track just a little bit.
Yeah.
So at this point you married. You
we're in the Marines.
You mentioned children. How many children did you have?
We ended up having 3.
3.
2 girls and 1 boy.
And then I remember you mentioning that at some point, and I'm not sure how much further along that would be, you and your husband ended up joining a ministry.
Right.
And this ministry was particularly not only successful, but meaningful to both of you.
Yes.
In which
it was the Healing Ministries. They call it the Healing Ministries.
And can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm trying to look up the name of it, but my husband had the main book where we studied from. We had a 3-year training, so this wasn't just a fly-by-night.
Mm-hmm.
They had an established ministry on the West Coast, and we used to drive from, we lived in Walnut Creek, California by then, but my husband had already finished the Marine Corps. He'd finished his career. He was a sergeant when he got out, and I was with him the whole time. We lived in a trailer on the base.
Wow.
They had a housing that was a trailer, and it was perfectly fine for 2 people. They required 2 people up to 2 children in one of those trailers. And I wasn't sure how that would work with 2 little kids bouncing around. But they were all around me, and
it worked.
Yeah, it worked. Yeah, if you had a bigger trailer, you had more children, or you had a higher rank than sergeant.
Gotcha.
And then they were in another area. And then if you really were a higher rank, they had real houses.
I see. And
then they had the barracks with all the guys.
Interesting setup.
Yeah, it was an interesting setup. And at the barracks they had where they ate, their mess hall. They had a movie theater. there was really nothing to do. We lived in 29 Palms, California.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
The local people did not hire. That was their statement if you went around trying to find a job. And I did that because I was bored in this small little trailer. I didn't have enough to do. And I was just repeatedly told, I'm sorry, but the local people here don't hire the military because they don't stay long enough to even train them right.
Gotcha.
I said, okay, I understand that. So I saw this Foster's Freeze being built, and it wasn't finished yet. And I thought, maybe they haven't hired anybody yet and they don't know the local protocol. I'll go see. So I went up and I talked to them. There was 2 owners. They liked me. They hired me.
Wow.
On the spot.
There you go. My goodness.
So I guess
You
God
had a
was in
magic
that.
touch.
Huh?
You had a magic touch.
I don't know. I think the good Lord had something to do with that one too. So I worked in the afternoon and through dinner. And that's usually when the base started to come over to the fast food place because they didn't always like to eat in the mess hall.
Sure.
With all the guys, and the food was pretty much the same. And so there's a lot of young men that came through that, and I was a cashier. I helped make hamburgers, cheeseburgers, and that, but I didn't cook them. We had a cook, so I didn't have to cook anything. But Foster's Freeze was a strange arrangement. One side was for the hot food, and one side was for the ice cream. And they hired another girl for the ice cream department. So I actually picked her up and took her to work because she didn't have a means of transportation.
No kidding.
Yeah. She asked me, and she ended up giving me 3 or 4 white uniforms to wear to work because she's supposed to wear a white uniform. I didn't own anything. I go to the store in Las Vegas where my parents and everybody lived in Las Vegas still. So we'd make trips on weekends, and we'd go, and I bought yardage, and I made myself a couple of summer-type dresses to wear.
Wow. You made your own wedding dress, and you made your own working dress.
Yeah, I sewed. I love to sew. I made a lot of kids' clothes, too.
Wow.
Made Dixon shirts.
Wonderful. Well, Marianne, thank you so much for a little bit of an insight into your life.
Okay.
I wanted to see if I could ask you a couple questions. So, married, how long were you married to your husband?
I have a hard time remembering that for some reason. Let me think. 67, I believe.
67 years.
Yeah.
My goodness. That's
60.
amazing.
And we just missed our anniversary when he passed away.
Oh, I see. I'm sorry for your loss.
Well, that's all right.
I did have the pleasure of meeting him and getting to meet both of you at the time. So I did get to hear a little bit about his story as well.
The Healing Ministries was really Dick's original call from God. I had a heart for it, and I prayed a lot. I was called to be an intercessor. But he was called to be in the Healing Ministries, and we knew it. And so when this opened up and the pastor said, those of you who are interested, come sign up. We have to get a class together. You're going to have to commit to 3 years of training. That threw a lot of people off when they didn't come. But
I can imagine.
we had a big group, and we traveled like a caravan.
I see.
And we went to the coast.
And what was the purpose of this healing ministry?
Okay. This healing ministry was open to anybody who felt they could maybe have help from God. And we mostly had people that had done everything medically they could, everything they knew, but they hadn't gotten well.
I see.
And they were desperate.
Wow.
Children, parents, adults, old people, anybody from society. It didn't matter if you were a religious person or not. That's kind of how we advertised. Because a lot of people think, well, if you're a religious person, you probably don't want you. That wasn't true. We advertised for anybody that needed help to come. And if they were willing to get prayer, they had to sign a release form, because we were not doctors and we were not trained psychiatrists or anything like that. We, negated all that in writing, and to keep ourselves safe from any lawsuits or what have you. They had to sign that they understood that, and they weren't going to do anything because they didn't get healed.
Sure.
We worked with mainly a Baptist group that was very involved in it already, and that was a blessing because they came to our church, and we came there, and then we all worked together. So we were trained by people who already were partly trained.
Well, that made it convenient.
Yeah, and plus the leadership from the coast came, and I don't think you could have gotten anybody training in a Christian world than that.
Well,
we really did have that, and we opened up our healing ministries, and we advertised it everywhere. And
can
so
you
we
tell
had
us
a lot of people.
one of the success stories that basically
Yes,
you keep in mind most?
Couples always had to have the opposite sex or the same sex in the room with whoever was praying. So if it was a woman, she always had to have a woman. If it was a man, he had to have a man. So Dick and I were a married couple. So we got a lot of children because the parents had to be there for that, both of them, if possible. And I don't remember any children particularly straight off, but I do remember one lady. She had a problem with her arm and her leg, and she went in the room where Dick was with another man and a woman, and they were praying for her healing. And she came out of there dancing. And of course, I was still praying for mine, so I can watch this happening.
Oh my goodness.
And she's coming out and she says, she's flipping her arm up and she's jumping with her leg and she's saying, I don't have any more pain. I don't have any more pain.
Oh my goodness.
And she's dancing around the room. And she sees these testimonials on the wall, people who have written what happened to them so that would encourage others. And so she was reading some of them. I want to put mine up here. I want to give God credit for this.
Oh my goodness.
So she did that. And it was good because a lot of people read those. It gave them courage to go in and get prayer.
How wonderful.
Because one thing we discovered, people are very hesitant to open themselves up to that kind of thing because most people are pretty private about that kind of their life that way. And they don't really know what to say, especially if they don't know the Lord yet.
Yeah.
We had many, many, many people accept the Lord. And one in particular I want to mention, he considered Dick and I his spiritual parents, mainly Dick, because Dick prayed for him, and when he was done and he got his healing, and his was in the mind, and he knew it, he wanted to join the healing ministries. I've got to do this. This is what I want to do. So we talked to the pastor, and he said, okay, if you're willing to be trained, and you'll have to do this pretty much on your own because, you can go where you got to go, but we can't do it here. We're not licensed for it within the church groups. But we can give you what we've got, and you can join us and learn how to do it. And so that's what we did. We gave him the papers to study. And
wow.
So he is now a pastor that goes to Africa.
Wow.
And he has made many pastors over there for the Lord. And they are always begging him to come over and help him. And we try to send books, Bibles.
That's wonderful. My goodness. So you're still in contact.
That was, to me, the biggest fruit for Dick and I because that was very personal.
And, well, thank you so much for sharing a little bit about the healing ministry. And I have one final question that we're kind of wrapping most of our interviews with.
Okay.
If you had a piece of advice that you might give to the generation that's coming up, the younger generation, what might be something that may have helped you in your life that you'd want to pass on as advice?
For me, truth was always important. And I have a bit of an analytical mind because I watch what happens when kids and people tell lies, and I know it. Now, I don't feel called to expose them. I just watch what's going to happen. And I pray I really pray for people like that because I'm saying they don't realize they're playing a game with Satan and that they're making their life a mess. And I would pray that the Lord would intervene somehow, some way, make himself real so that they can, and I will do this with people I see walking on the street. To this day, I do that.
Wow. So in all things, honesty.
Be constant in wanting the truth and hopefully receiving the Lord and accepting what he's done for us. Because we can't change people and we can't make anybody else do anything just because we want them to, including liking us.
Well, that is a great piece of advice. Thank you so much, Marianne, for joining us today
welcome.
and for sharing a little bit about your story.
Well, thank you.
I hope you had a good time.
I did.
Definitely did, as always. Have a wonderful day, Marianne. Thank you.
Thank you. You too. Thanks for inviting me.